Welcome. This is Kent Gregory again, and we are now in part two of the investment process. And in this part, we will cover, starting off pretty basically, we'll cover margin accounts, and then we'll go over initial and maintenance margin. And as always, we're following off of chapter two of Jordan, Miller, and Dolvin's Fundamentals of Investments, ninth edition from McGraw-Hill. Okay, so let's get into margin accounts. With a margin account, you're going to pay an interest rate on the money you borrow, which is typical. When you borrow money, you're going to pay interest, right? And this is based on the broker's call money rate. The call money rate is the rate that the broker, him or herself, pays to borrow the money. And then you're going to pay some sort of amount on top of the broker's call money rate. And this amount you pay is called the spread. So for example, suppose the call money rate is 4% and a brokerage charges a 2.5% spread on loan amounts $10,000 and under. So then you would pay 6.5% to borrow 10,000. So otherwise that's, exactly $650. When you purchase securities or stocks on credit, some of the money is yours and the rest is what you borrow. So the amount that is yours is called the margin, and margin is usually expressed as a percent. So another example, suppose you take 7,000 of your own money and borrow 3,000 from your broker to make a purchase. Your total investment is $10,000. The $7,000 margin is 7,000 divided by 10,000, which equals 0.70 or 70%. So your margin is 70%. Also, keep in mind that in this example, if the call money rate is 4% and the spread is 2.5%, then you're going to have to pay $195 to borrow that $3,000. Okay, so margin accounts and the account balance sheet. And so setting up an account balance sheet for a margin account, particularly at this stage, is a very easy way to visualize and track the investment. So in this example that we set up here, right in the middle of the page, you open a margin account with $5,000. You tell your broker to buy 100 shares of Walgreens Boot Alliance, also known as WBA. The shares in WBA are selling for $80 per share. So the total cost will be $8,000 for those 100 shares. So you need to borrow $3,000 because you opened that margin account up with $5,000. So immediately following your purchase, your balance sheet is going to look like this. So on the right-hand side, first the $3,000 loan you took to pay for the stock. So this is a liability right here, that $3,000. Because at some point you're going to have to repay that $3,000. The difference between the value of the assets and the loan amount is the $5,000. This is your account equity right here, account equity. I didn't mean to cross that out. So that's your account equity. And as it turns out, that's the net value of your investment. So note that your margin is equal to the account equity divided by the value of the stock owned and held in the account. So your margin is the $5,000 divided by the $8,000, which is going to equal 62.5%. I hope that makes sense for everybody. Another example of margin accounts in the account balance sheet is, let's say you want to buy 1,000 shares of Devon Energy, call sign DVN, at a price of $24 per share. You put up $18,000 and borrow the rest. So here's what the balance sheet looks like. You buy 1,000 shares. Let me get my marker out. Buy 1,000 shares of DVN right there, 24,000. You actually put up 18,000 and you borrow the 6,000. So here your margin is equal, again, to the account equity divided by the value of the stock owned and held in the account. So it's 18,000, which is your account equity, divided by the 24,000, which gives you 75%. So margin accounts will often have an initial margin, or will have an initial margin. So when you first purchase securities on credit, there's a minimum margin that you must supply. And this is called the initial margin, and it's expressed as a percent. And the minimum percent is set by the Federal Reserve. The current minimum in place since 1974 is 50%. So consider the following example. Suppose you have $3,000 in a trading account with a 50% initial margin. What's the largest order you can place? Well, if that $3,000, and I'm going to pick up my little marker again, if the $3,000, well, is your margin of the 50%, then you can then make a purchase of $6,000. So there's your 6 right there. Another example, if the initial margin is 60%, then the largest order you can place with that 3,000 is 5,000, and thus the most you can borrow is 2,000. So there we go. So margin accounts and the maintenance margin. So the maintenance margin is the minimum amount that must be present at all times in a margin account. And it's generally required by brokerages and exchanges. For example, the New York Stock Exchange requires a minimum of 25% maintenance margin. If your margin falls below the specified amount, so let's say that maintenance margin is 30%, then you may be, and actually you will be subject to a margin call, which is a demand by your broker to add funds to your account, pay off part of the loan, or sell securities to bring your margin back up to the required level. So basically, you've got to somehow come up to the required, in this case, 30% maintenance margin. And you can do it in any number of ways. So let's look at an example. So suppose your account has a 50% initial margin requirement and a 30% maintenance margin. So Vandelay stock is selling for $50 per share. You have 20,000 and you want to buy as much of Vandelay as you can. So with a 50% initial margin, you can buy up to $40,000 worth of Vandelay, i.e. 800 shares. So the account balance sheet looks like this. So your account equity, and I think I've got my marker, is the 20,000. The loan is the 20,000. And with those two together, you buy $40,000 worth of Vandelay, so the 800 shares. So I'm going to repeat all of this on the next page. So we see that up here. So this is all repeated from the prior page. So let's go down to here. So suppose right after your purchase, the stock falls to $35 per share. What's the balance sheet look like at this point, and are you subject to a margin call? So here we go. The margin loan is $20,000. Your account equity is 8. And the 800 shares at $35 per share is 28,000. So the total value of your position, meaning the stock you hold, falls to 28,000. So you've just seen a $12,000 loss. You still owe 20,000 to your broker, so that's the margin loan. So your account equity is 28,000 minus the $20,000 loan. So it's the assets, the shares, minus the loan, and that gives you your equity of $8,000. So your margin at that point is the 8,000 divided by the 28,000, or 0.286, or 28.6%. So you're below the 30% maintenance margin, so you are subject to a margin call.